Hi, everyone. Welcome to Figuring Out Fabric, where I ask dumb questions and you get smart answers. And I've got a good and long-term friend of mine, Angela Henry. She has been a Microsoft MVP since 2018. She's been a data consultant for a very long time. And this is going to be an interesting episode because it's kind of a reverse interview. Because Angela works with Synapse, Azure Data Factory, Databricks, nothing at all with Fabric. So we'll see if I can answer some questions.
Hooray, I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah. I won't even charge you for the consulting hours.
you.
I'm that kind of guy. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So real quick, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you do work with or some of the stuff you do today?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mostly do kind of data movement and data reporting projects. So, somebody's got 20 systems, they need to bring all that data together. Um I pull it from those data systems, put it in a single place, and then I model it. Um uh, you know, kind of whittle it down to be a really good, well-defined semantic model. And then I build reports on top of it, typically with Power BI. But you know, some people don't have that luxury of being able to use Power BI, so I also do reporting services work as well on top of that.
Oh my God. So you're still running into a lot of instances in the wild or
Yeah, yeah. The consulting company I work for, their target is kind of the small to medium-sized businesses,
sure.
and a lot of them just don't have that luxury, to be able to go to the cloud, because they've already spent money on, data center infrastructure, and they're not gonna pay
Right.
more to go with the cloud. So, use what they got, and you know what? I say if it works for you, why move?
I agree, and there's a lot of reports that you should never build in Power BI. Like I've made invoices in SSRS. I would never make one in Power BI. It's just funny to hear someone mention SSRS unironically because like the tool started stagnating around 2010, and I haven't touched it since 2016, like almost a decade. So it's like when you see a horseshoe crab and you're like, you're an ancient creature. My gosh.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of our clients, they, reporting services is great for operational stuff. Hard,
Yes.
not so much.
No.
So it all just depends on your need. Um, so yeah, that's what I do.
Nice. Yeah. So what have you heard about Fabric so far? Is it just that like you keep seeing that like Arun keeps making announcements and like people seem really interested in the textiles, but you haven't looked into it, or what's your like peripheral awareness up to this point?
So if you couldn't tell, this is a sewing machine behind me.
Oh, nice. I did not notice that. Oh my God, amazing. So you're a Fabric expert. I don't. Why are we doing a reverse interview?
I know, exactly, exactly. So honestly, that's the first thing that ever comes to mind is when people talk about fabric, I'm thinking, "Ooh, I wonder who designed that," you know?
Yeah, I'm of the opinion. I'm of the opinion that no product should ever be called Fabric, Mesh, or Cloud because all three by definition means that it's incoherent and poorly defined.
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan, and this is not a new opinion, right? We've had Service Fabric, we've had like HP had their Mesh or whatever. Now we have Data Mesh. Just I don't like it.
Yeah. So, I use a lot of the standalone tools,
Yeah.
that Microsoft offers that are folded into Fabric. And right now, they still work really well for what my clients need. So, um I hear all of these announcements about Fabric, and that's what Microsoft is investing in, and blah blah blah. And they did the same thing like when Power BI was first released.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, everybody, you don't need to use reporting services anymore because Power BI is going to solve everybody's reporting.
Yeah.
Well, no, not really. And that's kind of how I feel about Fabric. I understand that they're trying to create a single platform in the same way that, Databricks basically has a single platform that you could do everything with. Their
Right.
reporting is not so great. Um, but because they're building it from the ground up, um, you don't have full feature parity and it's kind of buggy.
Yeah.
So in good conscience, I can't recommend Fabric for any of my clients. Um, so help me change my mind.
I'll try. I'll try. Um, yeah, I mean, I think like I don't know if like the Microsoft police are gonna like break down my door if I say this, but yeah, it's got some rough patches, and I think honestly, there's a lot of cases where if if these other tools are working for you, there's no necessarily huge reason to switch. But I think there are reasons to consider Fabric. And it's funny you say it reminds you of Power BI. Um, I the analogy to Power BI gives me hope and terror because I was there when what's the thing from Narnia when the deep magic was written. I was there like I started with Power BI since like 2016. And I remember when you couldn't print or export to Excel, or you could barely format a table. I remember 2018 when David Eldersveld was writing how to like do a spark line with SVGs. Um, and so my two biggest worries is have they bitten off more than they can chew because they're fighting a two front war, so to speak, in the sense that there's a set of features that enterprise high-end customers care about tends to be around governance, security, automation. And then there's a set of features that low-end customers care about, and they tend to be kind of more like low-code solutions, how to get started, how to get my data into there. And the problem is that like the Venn diagram is not there's not a ton of overlap. And so you run into this issue that like you try to cater to one set of customers and you risk upsetting the other kind of set. Now, ultimately, in my opinion, I mean, we're celebrating a decade of Power BI. Microsoft did eventually succeed with Power BI, but in a lot of ways, that was a much smaller kind of project, right? Um, so the comparison to Power BI gives me sort of like hope and concern. But to like start off like where I think it makes sense. So I think one area where it makes sense is if you're already paying for Power BI Premium, you already have it. You already have Fabric and Power BI Premium is being deprecated. So you're going to be on Fabric anyway. And so for something like that where you're already paying for it, it's worth looking into kind of where can you expand out in little sorts of ways. I think that's a real benefit. Um,
So let me
Good.
so let them he asks. So you said if you're on a premium, what if you're not premium? What if you don't use premium SKUs right now?
I my personal opinion is that um there's I I'm doing a terrible job of defending Fabric. I'm gonna get the Microsoft police are gonna just bust down my door. No, I mean, so in my mind, there's like specific use cases that make a lot of sense, but there's a layer of architectural planning that's involved that I think people don't anticipate. And so what I mean by that, the reason why I like keep making all these like grunting noises is one area where I think it makes a lot of sense is get like a very low fabric SKU. use that for some of your basic lakehouse kind of stuff, and pause it. Now, the problem with that, the reason why like it's a giant pain in the butt is my understanding with Databricks, if you pause it, you still have the storage. But with Fabric, if you turn off the capacity, they lock the door on the storage. Now, I mean, so yeah, it's one of the annoying differences. So because whenever you're using Fabric, so there's ways to like access external storage. That's fine, right? So if you're using Databricks today and you have some reason to use Fabric, you can do metadata mirroring, or you can do what are called shortcuts to external storage. But let's say that you don't have any of that. You're going all in on Fabric. Well, there's no storage primitive like in Azure where you can say, I just want blob storage. I just want Azure Data Lake storage. The storage primitive is the lakehouse. And so basically, like you make a lakehouse, you can then dump as much data as you want in there, but you also have on top of that the SQL endpoint and the whole Delta tables management, all that stuff. The problem is, let's say I put in all my data and then I pause the capacity. I can no longer access that data in the lakehouse until I turn the capacity back on, right? So so there's some kind of like jury rig kind of ways that you can simulate some of the affordability of Synapse, but you're not going to quite get there, right? So you can do all your ETL on an F2 at night, do your import into Power BI in a different workspace, and you can get a lot of the benefits pretty cheaply. But this is where I get frustrated because I've seen people talk about this, but it's if you're a small you deal with small businesses. If you're a small business and you have to set up some sort of scheduling so you can pause and turn off an F2, it's a bit of a non-starter, right? So I think there's situations in that scenario where it can make sense, right? Where you can kind of find ways to take advantage of some of that stuff sort of cheaply. Um, I think I think for larger projects, you really have to see where Microsoft is going and have some confidence in that. They have their roadmap for like features that are coming out, that sort of thing. And you have to get enough benefit from kind of the all-in-one ecosystem. Like this was the same thing with like Power BI versus Tableau. Like whenever, again, going back to let's say 2018, 2019, or even today, well, Tableau slowed since Salesforce bought it, but um, back then I would tell people if you want like gold standard quality visuals, just go Tableau, right? But if you want all the Microsoft ecosystem integration, you want all these pieces around it, Power BI starts to show a lot of value there. The I can tell you the customer that project I'm working on, Fabric makes a ton of sense. Now part of that is they already have Power BI Premium, but let's assume that they didn't. Um, so they are in higher ed. I won't go into more detail than that. And they have a new CIO. And before, they were trying to diversify their data platform. And so they had on-prem data in SQL Server. They had API data from Workday. And then the SQL data they were loading into Snowflake and doing a bunch of joins there because of some performance issues. And then they were loading the data from Snowflake into a Postgres software as a service thing called Edify, which basically provided kind of a UI layer on top and kind of a data model for higher ed. And in that scenario, it's just going through like all these different kinds of hoops and all of that.
Yeah.
And the new CEO is like, why aren't we all under Microsoft? And so in that scenario, we're going through a lot of pain right now with like remigrating and all that kind of stuff. But areas that I'm seeing kind of wins in is that I I'm showing all of these kind of Power BI or SQL Server kind of pros T-SQL notebooks. And we're able to have a process around that and see the history on all that kind of stuff. And again, if you live in Databricks, you're like, we've had notebooks since the dawn of time. But if you're coming from the Power BI side, that's not necessarily the case. Being able to use data warehouses and being able to write back with SQL, there's there's a bunch of these wins for those little things. But I mean, being honest, there's also kind of like the painful opportunity cost in terms of picking the right tools. Like they're paying me a lot of money to tell them the right thing, but that opportunity cost is real because I ran into that with like, okay, we need to get data into the system. Well, do we use copy jobs? Do we use data pipelines, which are Azure Data Factory? Do we use Gen 2 data flows? Do we use Spark notebooks? All this kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at right now is I think you either need a benefit from consolidation or you need some benefit from kind of this like ecosystem and you see where they're going. You can see they show the roadmap or you're paying for it. And why are you double paying is kind of the three use cases in my mind right now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So let's say I have a client, small company. Um, they are essentially greenfield. They don't really have an Azure presence. They're trying to get away from on-prem and go to the cloud. Um, one of their sources is a DB2 database. It's an on-prem. Those people, they don't give up their AS400s easily. So, fuck, give us $1 million in it. They're not gonna, even though that investment was 20 years ago, they still remember that it cost $1 million. So they're
Yeah.
gonna get rid of it. So I have been tasked with pulling data from that DB2 database and then pulling some Excel files in and mixing all that data together. And like I said, they have, basically no cloud presence. So would this be a good candidate? And data volumes are not very large at all.
Right.
And when I say not very large, we're probably talking on a daily basis from DB2, we would probably have to pull less than 10 meg of data a day. So very, very small. Total size is probably still less than 20 gig. So, and they want to be able to do some reporting on top of it. They have created some Power BI reports because they have reporting services
Right.
on-prem. So they want to be able to now do this up in the cloud and then eventually grant their customer base access to be able to run these reports. So would that be a good fit for Fabric, or should I just stick with my standard of using the individual tools? Um, because I know at some point Microsoft is going to have to supply some kind of migration to get from your standalone tools
Right.
to Fabric.
Right. Yeah, and I think I've seen they're working on stuff for Synapse to Fabric. Um, yeah, so that's an interesting use case because this really is like that one end of the spectrum. It's the small data kind of stuff. So my answer today is a maybe. My answer in like a year or two is closer to a probably. And so I'll elaborate why I say that. Um, so one of the things that I think I want to say Shabnab Watson was talking about it, but I think they added for Gen 2 data flows as a destination SharePoint. And so I'm expecting over time there's going to be better better support for kind of file management with like SharePoint or OneDrive or some of those kinds of things. Because right now, the biggest problem that I would see with that whole use case is you talk about Excel files. And right now, the only real way to store files in Fabric is you're putting files in a lakehouse somewhere. You could read them from on-prem the same way that you can today with Power BI through like the on-premises data gateway. So that would be a thing, right?
Yeah.
The problem is in their case, they would probably want an F2. which is the lowest tier. And so you're looking at, for reserved, it's like $165 per month, which is probably fine in their case. If they're okay just pausing at night, like the scenario I talked about, even better. The problem is whether or not there's an easy way to parse those Excel files without using Spark, because you get, oh, I think you get 2 Spark virtual cores per CU. So I think the lowest level gives you 4. And when you run a notebook, I don't know if this is the case when you connect to it with like a live session, but I ran into this issue. When you run a notebook, the default like VM size or whatever for the notebook is 8 cores and 56 gigabytes of RAM. And so what I don't know is how high of a fabric level, like probably F8, do you need to go before like you can comfortably run Spark kind of stuff? That would be like the biggest question mark in my head. Now, for getting the data in there, um, it depends a lot on the source type, because if there's just a like a an incremental key or something that you can filter on, or it's like you said, it's small, so you can probably just do full loads. You're probably okay doing like data flows. The question is, does data pipelines or the copy job support DB2? Because the copy job is slick. It's really, really nice. I'm very happy with it. So I know for a fact that Azure Data Factory has at least like 60% more connectors than data pipelines in Fabric.
They have a PPT connector.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know off the top of my dome if
Sure.
Fabric has or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if it doesn't, right? Like the first episode we did of this podcast was with Kelly Potvin Gorman, and she talked about how there's plenty of times where it's like you have these legacy systems. I would consider DBT to be a legacy system, and you have to use Azure Data Factory to get the data, right? So those are kind of the immediate sort of concerns. I think the third concern is just not everybody needs a lake house. You know what I mean? Like lake houses are very much designed for big data, and eh, databases are fine. Um, so all of that is to say that I would expect that there's probably, if I had to bet money, which hopefully I'm not, um, that there's probably going to be some things that might not be supported exactly the way that you want. I would expect that in a year or two, it's going to be much closer to like a yes, or maybe in the heck yes. Um, but the things that would in my mind like tip me over is one, if I thought like being able to use notebooks against the data is a big win. Another is if I have a decent number of sources, and being able to kind of have those all be queryable in the same place is a big win. Like that's the kind of thing we're running into now with that project I'm on, is we're pulling that data from Workday. I'm using copy jobs to pull data from various on-premises SQL databases. And the fact that, pardon me, the users can just query it all and it's all just separated by schema is a big win, right? So that would be my answer for this case study. Um, yeah, we've got a few more minutes before we should probably kind of wrap up with
So
it. Yeah, please.
question about
Yeah.
so you're talking about this copy job. So what is a copy job in Fabric? Is that the equivalent of a just a straight copy pipeline in Azure?
Yeah. This was a point of confusion for me as well, like at the beginning of the year when I did like a thing on this, because I wrote a blog post on comparing performance and all the ways to get CSVs loaded into Fabric, and there's like 10 different ways. The copy job is a bespoke UI for, I believe it's powered by the copy activity in pipelines. But it's a dedicated UI where it's just for copying data. And it's nice because you don't have to think too much about flow, and you can set up incremental load and all that kind of stuff. So but I believe it's I'll hopefully update the show notes if I'm wrong. But I believe it's powered by the same thing as the copy activity.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good to know.
Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Um, no, no, that was actually very helpful and gives me some really good insight to think about. We'll probably stick with Data Factory for this client that's greenfield. Um, and because we've got those different data sources, we're going to dump it into a data lake so that we can then probably use Synapse and notebooks to munge that data together and then
Yeah. And
use
the
it.
one of the things that's nice is that Fabric does have pretty good support for, like I said, external storage. So there's ways to kind of move things over. One of the things I would also keep an eye on is they're adding more and more change data capture support for loading data, right? And so that's one of those things where I like follow up in a year and put a little pin in your calendar to see if that's changed. Um, all right. So let's kind of wrap up. So normally I ask the other person their favorite and least favorite Fabric feature, but I guess since I'm being interviewed, I will try to think of my favorite and least favorite Fabric feature. Um, so I my favorite definitely is the copy job that I mentioned because it just works. Um, I know when it first came out, some people had some concerns about the capacity units consumption. So that's kind of like the fake measurement for usage, kind of like how Azure SQL had DTUs and all that kind of stuff. Um, but like as someone who had never touched Azure Data Factory or pipelines, it was all kind of initially overwhelming. And just having something that's like, here's the source, here's the sink. Do you want an incremental? What columns do you want? Just chef's kiss. Um, I think I d- I won't say it's my least favorite feature, but I'll say it's the one that has the most potential. Is I I love Power Query. If we can just make a few improvements to Gen 2 data flows, because one, from everything I see people talk about and from some of my own basic testing, it seems like it's one of the most expensive ways to move data in Fabric right now, which is a shame, but like I'm glad that I didn't have to take an Excel add-in from 20 years ago. No, not 20, 15, whatever, 2010s. 15 years ago that was never meant for this and try to make it like cloud performant. So, I mean, it's not an easy task, but it's one of the most expensive ways. And right now, it doesn't support specifying a schema when you're making a new table with it. And so everything we're doing with this customer is in schema. So like it's just not even an option. Now you can, if the table exists, you can specify it and you can specify a lakehouse schema for the table. But if you're making a new one, it just always defaults to DBO. There's no way to be like, yeah. So I love I love Power Query. If I could do all of my data movement in transformations in Power Query, I would. But I think it needs a little bit more baking. But again, I'm glad I'm not on that team because they've been given an impossible task. And maybe we shouldn't try to uplift things from Excel add-ins to cloud data movement. But that's just me.
Where else would we get our functionality? Because the world runs in Excel, right?
Absolutely, right? No, I get it. So that's my answer. We'll see in a year uh how it changes. Where can people find you and is there anything you want to promote?
You can find me. I do have a blog site, sqlswimmer.com, sqlswimmer.com.
Nice.
I don't post nearly as much as I used to. I am not on Twitter. I am in the Fediverse out on Mastodon. A SQL Swimmer at dataplatform.social.
Shout out to Daniel Hootmacher for still maintaining that Mastodon. Sorry, he's tried to pawn it off. He's like, does anyone want to learn Docker? But
Everyone's like, no.
yeah.
So I truly appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think there are 3 of us data platform people there, and that's it, but
I know. I still post there mostly just to make Matthew Roche happy. I'm like, oh, he saw my stuff. But
yep, yep. Um, and, I am on LinkedIn, The only thing I will say about LinkedIn is that if you want to connect with me, just tell me where you saw me, how you know me, what.
Mm,
If I don't recognize your name or your face, I will ignore your request.
yeah.
It's nothing personal. It's a safety thing. Being a woman in IT is not always pleasant. Being
Yeah.
a woman in IT on the internet can be downright dangerous. So there's my little spiel on.
That's fair. No, that's totally reasonable.
Yep, yep. I don't have anything else going on right now. No conferences coming up or anything. I'm just
Just doing a lot of sewing, doing a lot of swimming, living life.
good. Yep, yep. That's what I'm doing.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on, Angela. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, Eugene. I appreciate it.